Hello. Well, I was going to make a video at the suggestion of one of my viewers about feminism and public toilets. And it's an interesting subject. But then something else cropped up, so that'll have to wait for a slow news time. It's about the row between Sargon and Mr. Metokur. It's not just between those two, there's more going on to that. And actually, I'm going to start by talking about the Bible, because the Bible has a lot to say about human nature. Before I do, though, I just want to tell you, sometimes I script what I say. I don't write it out word for word. I do bullet points. That keeps things in the right order. This time, I haven't scripted anything. And that means you may see me occasionally just stopping or with my eyes, sort of going all over the place as I try and grab words out of the air. I hope you'll forgive that. All right, well, let's start. There's two ways of approaching Exodus. I'm afraid that Christianity did a disservice to that particular book of the Bible, well, indeed to many of the books of the Old Testament, because Christian theologians and philosophers always tried to make the Old Testament into a prophecy for the New Testament. So everything was filled with a spiritual significance, when in fact all it was a history. It's like somebody taking a history of England and making Henry VIII some sort of a precursor to Queen Elizabeth II, and talking about everything he did in a spiritual sense, and trying to make excuses for his murderous attitude to the women in his life. They were a Catholic and therefore satanic maybe, or they were too independent or not independent enough, and God was trying to show us that there are different sorts of wives. And I mean, you can make those sorts of arguments, can't you? That's not the way it really should be read, the Exodus. It's a story about what happens in a certain historical situation. Whether it's really history or not is sort of immaterial. It's human nature, though, and that's without a doubt. Now, here we have Moses. I have my own theories about Moses, by the way. Moses is an Egyptian name, and his brother Aaron, that's an Egyptian name as well. None of those names are Hebrew, and several of the other people surrounding them are Egyptians. And my theory is that this is an echo of a story about an Egyptian member of the royal family who had stuck to the old religion, which was started first by, I've forgotten the name, a pharaoh, who came up with the idea of one God. And he fought against the tide, because everybody else in Egypt, the priesthood, of course, had a vested interest in keeping the multiple gods, and the people themselves were brought up with the idea of multiple gods. They didn't like this one God business either. And this pharaoh built a city dedicated to this one God. Oh yeah, he was the father of Tutankhamun, who was originally called Tutankhaten because Aten was the name of this sun god. Now, this king forced people, Akhenaten, of course, right? He forced people to worship this one god, and he tried to put down all the other gods. And during his lifetime, he succeeded. But as soon as he died, the flood came back, and the priesthood re-established itself. They took Tutankhaten and made a puppet king of him, renamed him Tutankhamun, and re-established the original pantheon. The city dedicated to Aten was just abandoned. Just because that happened doesn't mean to say there weren't people, probably in the royal family, who stuck to that old religion, but quietly, because it was dangerous. And my theory is that Moses was one of these people, you know, a couple of generations down, believed in this, saw the Israelites, because they were broadly monotheistic as well, saw a way of worshipping this God, synthesized Aten with the Israelite God, or maybe even took on the Israelite God, knowing what he already knew, and took these people out of Egypt to form a true religion, the true religion that his grandfather or great-grandfather or whatever it was had started out. Now, when he got these Israelites out into the desert, most of them followed him. He had these new ideas, liberalist, if you like, against the Egyptian system. He took them out into the desert, and there were several rumblings. This is what if you really read the Bible, this is what's interesting about it. The first thing that happens is when there are a couple of weeks out into the desert, all the people start complaining they can't get onions. Yeah, of course, you can't grow onions in the desert, and you grew onions by the side of the Nile relatively easily. They got out into the desert, no onions anymore. And they nearly went back to Egypt because they missed onions, garlic and melons. But that's such human nature, isn't it? That's how people are. Oh, yes, we're going to go out and we're going to fight and we're going to establish our individual... Oh, bloody hell, I can't manage without my coffee in the morning. You know, that's how people are. Anyway, Moses kept talking to them, kept convincing them of God, kept them going. And then he hit a bit of a brick wall with a small group of people led by a man called Korah and somebody else called Datan, who was very well played by Edward G. Robinson in the film The Ten Commandments, although not really that true to life. This was a group of people who said to Moses, who gave you the right to lead us, to tell us what to do, to order us about? And in the story of the Bible, I think they get hit by a thunderbolt, or they get swallowed up by the earth, something like that. And then Moses proceeded. But if you look at the story as a basic story of human nature, here we have a people who have left a certain ideology and they're trying to find their way, and there's one chap leading them, and then and they all go along with him for a while, and then they start to think that this fellow is getting above himself. I suppose some of you will already know what I'm talking about now, because I'm not talking about the biblical Sargon now. There was a time when Sargon was just a speaker among speakers. And then there are people like Coach Redpill who started calling him a leader. Until then, I'd never heard anyone describe him as a leader, and Sargon didn't describe himself as a leader. But that seemed to either Coach Redpill was at the point of the arrow, or he'd already heard other people, I hadn't, talking about Sargon as being a leader. And now Sargon has taken it upon himself to be a leader. And then you get people like Mr. Metokur saying, who are you to put yourself in this sort of position? And there are rows on the internet about it now. First of all, we all have to be careful about following the leader. You remember that thing in the Life of Brian, where Brian says, you're all individuals, and this whole zombie-like crowd starts to say, we are all individuals. I am sure every one of you listening to this has seen that, because the sort of people who watch that sort of film might watch me. Now, we've all got to be careful about letting that happen to us. I'm not saying that Sargon is wrong. I think he's right. I think he's got a lot of good points. But this is not a movement that needs a leader. It may need some people who are more energetic than others, and Sargon's certainly very prolific and thoughtful and a good researcher. But this is not that sort of a movement. It's not even that sort of technology anymore. We have to be careful. We have to be skeptical, and we must remember not to allow too much power over our own minds. I'm not suggesting some sort of magic stuff, by the way. You switch your own mind on. You follow your own path. But sometimes you follow your own path by forcing yourself, forcing your own mind into some sort of an ideological tunnel. You're not actually following the leader. You're following how you perceive the leader. And we all have to be aware of that. I made a video before about the power of radio and how I could see some parallels with the internet and how this is a new medium, and people are acting as badly in some cases, but as individuals, so it's not so dangerous at the moment. It's very important that we all realise that we are all individuals and that Sargon is an important force and somebody from whom we should take advice. Advice, though. We have to remember this is a world community. This is the first world community, and we're feeling our way, and we could go horribly wrong. We could go incredibly right as well. We've just got to remember that. Okay, sorry about all the stop-starts and the trip-ups. I'll see how this plays, and if it's all right, I'll load it up.